Recording. All right, we're ready to go.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. This is Chuck Spence with the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. We welcome you to our outreach this morning. Before I begin, I want to make an announcement that with the pandemic getting better under control, with I think last I heard about 46% of Utahns being vaccinated. PTAC is pleased to announce that our offices are now open full-time, and we are also open for in-person meetings and one-on-one counseling. So if you want to meet other than on the phone or by Zoom or some virtual platform, you are welcome to contact your PTAC regional manager and schedule an appointment in their office or perhaps at your office for some PTAC consultation. So I wanted to make you aware of that. Again, today's presentation and webinar is on responding to a request for proposal and a request for quote. As you know, in federal procurement, well over 90% of these types of solicitations are going to be either an RFQ or an RFP. And we are pleased to have two experts in this area today. Our first is Tom Gerke. Of course, Tom is with the PTAC program, and he is a regional manager for Utah, Wasatch, and Juab counties. Tom has a vast amount of experience in the public and private sector in understanding project management. In addition to his expertise in RFQs and RFPs, Tom is also our subject matter expert for cybersecurity and CMMC issues. So we are pleased to have with us today Tom Gerke. Our other presenter is Ms. Francene Bielik. She is a senior contract consultant for LSI. And Francene spent nearly 40 years in government service. She spent the majority of her career as a contracting officer at Hill Air Force Base, where she recently retired in January 2020. So we are pleased to have these two subject matter experts in the RFP, RFQ process. And by the end of the presentation, and by the way, we're going to get into the weeds of this. So you're going to learn all about the correct forms, what the forms are, the uniform contract format, and by the end, you should be very knowledgeable and confident in responding to an RFQ or an RFP. But if you still feel like you need some help, and we welcome that, contact your PTAC regional manager, and we will help you prepare and review and submit that RFP with you. So we now will turn the time over to Mr. Tom Gerke. Tom?
Good morning, all. Jump right into it. Some of it's, like Chuck said, gets really into the weeds, and we're going to look at the individual blocks on some of these RFPs that come out and what goes into those blocks. Some of it's as simple as a date. Some of it is a little more complicated, but we'll jump right into it and start with, how and why. One of the things that, you look at from a business planning perspective is this is business to government sales. Why? The United States government is the world's largest purchaser of goods and services. It's an incredible amount of money, but there's rules. There's unique rules when it comes to competing for providing services and products to the government. You have to know the rules. You have to be able to follow the rules that the government lays out in the request for proposal, or you'll be considered non-responsive right off the bat. One of the things with the government is that they're risk adverse, and so it's really good to have a physical presence and be able to explore who your customer is before you start bidding on proposals. So as always, whether it's business to government, business to business, or business to commercial sales, you have to know your customer. And it's a business decision. There's a lot of variety of sources for obtaining contracts. You could go out and get a GSA schedule, get on a schedule if there's a variety of items that can be procured through the GSA schedule, and we've got resources to help you apply for one of those schedules. Here's a chart that shows just how much the federal government buys, and I mean it's incredible. It overwhelms the marketplace. So there's a lot of opportunities out there if you have a defined service or product. So if you have something of value to offer the government, you make the business decision to jump in and make that part of your business plan. Here's the big boys. They're always looking for subcontractors. So there's a variety of ways to determine what these big companies are looking for. They may advertise for subcontractors on particular projects. Some of these companies maintain a database of subcontractors, and they will go through that database and look for people that can support them bidding on a project. Right now, the big deal, I think, is out at Hill Air Force Base, the Strategic Missile Defense Projects. So that's one of the bigger ones in this area. So who are your customers? Well, the government buys everything. I mean, they buy toothbrushes, they buy carpet cleaning services, they buy tanks, they buy food. It's the whole gamut of things that they buy. But as you can see from this chart, the biggest purchaser is the military. So here's some contract vehicles for multiple award contracts that are used. The GSA schedule is now a multiple award schedule, consolidated schedule. Formerly there were 24 individual schedules. They've combined those into a consolidated schedule, but it's still basically the same process. And then there's individual Veterans Administration schedules for medical services and equipment. There's government-wide acquisition contracts like the STARS 2, Alliant. There's also agency multiple award contracts. There's one for medical services. I did a lot of responding to RFPs on this class program, mostly services and dentists, doctors, nurses, etc. And there's a lot of things procured through these schedules. So some of them have on-ramping on an irregular basis, and some of them are always open for on-ramping. So you just have to decide. It depends on what you're selling and what multiple award schedules available for what you're selling. Now the government buys all year long, but their fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 31st. So typically what happens is at the end of the fourth quarter, towards the end of the fourth quarter, there's a big push to obligate money by an agency, because most cases, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. So if you're in business to do business with the government, you have to be aware that your government customer, may want to or will be looking to buy things that you might have a very, very short turnaround time at the end of the fiscal year to respond to. So where does the government advertise their requirements? The big one is it's not beta.sam anymore. They've taken the beta away. It's just sam.gov. It's a single government point of entry for federal procurement opportunities, over 25,000. And so government buyers will publicize their business opportunities by posting directly to SAM. And there's also, they'll post pre-solicitations, they'll post sources sought, and pre-solicitations and sources sought are an opportunity for you as a service provider or a product provider to shape the requirement. So at that point, you can, I'm a little distracted. Somebody on one of these screens is doing yard work or something, I guess. Anyway, we in PTAC provide a bid matching service or a bid search service that looks at 150 different sites for procurement opportunities. And we tailor that for your particular business. So it's a way of seeing the opportunities that are out there without trying to search for them yourself. So, I mean, this overview, this part of it is, simply what you need to do as a company to contract with the federal government is you have to understand your competition. You have to be able to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. You have to do your market research to figure out who within the government is going to buy your product or has a need for your product. If you can narrow your target client to the top 3 agencies best aligned for what you do, you need to know their budget, you need to know your budget, and you need to have contacts within the agency. And it takes some work. It's not an overnight thing. I tell people that it could be 6 to 18 months before you get your first government contract. So it's a long-term business strategic plan. It's just a couple of basic rules that the federal government agencies have to meet. The Federal Acquisition Regulation System, the FAR system, a lot of agencies have amendments to that. There's a Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation, but these are where all the requirements get pulled from. And we'll show you later on in this presentation where some of the FAR clauses get either referenced or quoted in full in the solicitation. This is a pretty comprehensive list of the agency modifications or supplements to the Prime Federal Acquisition Regulation. As you can see, almost every agency in the government has published their own amendments or supplements to the FAR. All right, well, enough of that. So the procurement process, an agency will sometimes issue a pre-solicitation request for information. It can either be a request for information, an RFI, or a sources sought. Sometimes there's a phase 1 opt-in, and then an agency might do industry days where they present their future requirements for the next fiscal year, maybe even the next 5 years. Some of the agencies will, and these are, I think, depending on the agency, you can find them published online. And then the next step is after they do the pre-solicitation and maybe modify the requirement or based on the information they've received. Like I said, a request for information or sources sought gives you, as a service provider or a parts provider, the opportunity to influence the requirement. And that's the only, to me, that's the only place in this whole process where you've actually got an opportunity to present your product as an alternative or as a better solution to what they're asking for. Because by the time the solicitation comes out, the government is normally not going to change how the requirement's stated. So in this next step, there's different kinds of solicitations. We'll go through them. There's requests for quotes, there's requests for proposals, and then there's invitations for bids. Now, I've only seen a few IFBs in my time, but most of the time it's RFQs and RFPs. So this is where it gets a little into the weeds. The solicitation forms, they're defined in the FAR subpart 53.200. There's a FAR clause for commercial items that I've seen quite a bit lately. There's a standard form 1449, which is a solicitation order for commercial items. See that quite a bit. And then there's under FAR 53.213, there's simplified acquisition procedures where there's a variety of different forms they can use, SF30, for example, or the 1449. And you'll see on the form in the solicitation package, you'll see the top page is going to be one of these forms. For the most part, if the government's not buying a part number, an NSN, if they're buying a commercial item, it'll be on an SF 1449. And then there's a variety of other forms that they can use depending on the type of item they're buying. And then under the FAR clause 53.215, if it's contracting by negotiation, they'll use the requirement will come out on these forms. So this is just a little more in depth about the contract format. What happens is the RFP will come out on one of these forms, and then that form will be the top page of your offer, and you'll sign it, and if the government accepts it, they'll sign it, and it becomes part of the contract. Here's where it gets a little in the weeds. Here's a picture of the standard form 1449. And the government, the contracting officer, contracting representative will complete several of the blocks. And there'll be a contract number, there'll be an award date, there may be an order number. It'll show who's issuing the RFP. And then as you can see in block 10, it's going to tell you whether or not it's an unrestricted acquisition that anybody can bid on, or it's a set aside for a particular category of small business or small and disadvantaged business set aside. In block 10, you'll see there's a SIC and a size standard. That'll tell you, depending on the category of the acquisition, what, for example, a size standard for a particular SIC code or a next code may be under 5 million, under 7 million, or may be defined by the number of people in your company. So simply, here's the page number, and it'll give you an idea when you look at it how many pages there are in the actual solicitation. Some of them can get quite extensive depending on the statement of work. Contract number is you can look at the contract number, and the first part of the contract, positions 1 through 6 will identify the department or agency that's issued it. And the last 2 digits of the fiscal year is shown. Position 9 is the type of instrument, and then 10 through 13 is just the 4-digit serial number of that particular acquisition. This one's easy. The award date, And then if there's a blanket ordering agreement that you have, there'll be an order number, because BPA is not a contract. The order number becomes part of the contract number. And then here's an example of a solicitation number. The first 6 digits will identify the agency. It's an activity address code, and you can always use that to look up who's issuing the solicitation, what agency. This one's self-explanatory. So either the buyer or the contracting officer is listed in block 7A. 7B will have their phone number. If you've got questions, you can either call them, or within the body of the RFP, it'll tell you how you have to submit your questions, whether that's by email by a certain date, or maybe it says you can call them. It's up to the individual contracting officer. And this contact information is for the buyer or the contracting officer. It's not for the person within the agency that has the requirement. So it's not going to be a technical person, and it's not going to be like a project manager. They'll tell you the due date, and then they'll tell you the date and time it's due. And if you don't meet that time, and if you look, it'll tell you what the local time is that they want it by. If it's 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and you're on the West Coast, 3-hour difference, you need to be aware of that, because it's 10 o'clock their time, not 10 o'clock your time. In this block, you can see what command is issuing it. Normally in the RFP, the first couple of paragraphs of the statement of work will tell you who the agency is also, and tell you give you a little background of what they're looking for, the solution they're looking for, the problem they're trying to solve. Here's all the different categories that an acquisition can be set aside for people that are eligible within this, within these areas, whether it's a disabled veteran-owned small business, a woman-owned small business. Different agencies have different benchmarks they have to meet. They may have to 10% of the contracts they issue, or a certain dollar value of the contracts they issue may need to go to a small business. Once again, the size standard in the next code will be specified. Different North American industrial classification standards, the codes that your business is classified under, will have different size standards to meet a small business criteria. So in this case, delivery is usually specified in the body of the contract, and not in this block 11. Most of the time, it's FOB destination. Rated orders is a way that they talk about a rated order takes precedence over unrated orders. So if you were to receive a rated order, you need to give that agency preferential treatment, and you have to extent possible ensured delivery by the required delivery date. So I don't think I've ever seen a rated order when I was buying, when I had requirements. I worked in a program office, so I don't think we ever had rated orders. Trying to think of an example of a rated order. It could be something as simple as bottled water for troops that are in Afghanistan or Iraq.
Could I intercede for a minute? When you say a rated order, what exactly is that?
So the government will like categorize orders based on requirements. So in the first paragraph A, it talks about DX rated orders. So there's different ratings. If you had maybe an emergency need or a short turnaround time for an aircraft part, maybe A-10s were getting deployed somewhere or F-15s were getting deployed somewhere, and there was a shortage of a repair part, they can make that a rated order.
Okay. So it's kind of based on emergency need.
Yeah, and it's telling the contractor that they need to bump up your requirement ahead of everybody else's.
Thank you.
Jump in here anytime, Francine, if I'm saying
I was just going to
stupid.
say, that one is usually only used in emergency situations. And if you do get a DX rated order, that moves to the top of your production line. That takes precedent over all of your work. It's rarely used, but like in time of war, in time of a national emergency, they can use that. And that does mean that you will have to push that item, that production line to the top. That takes priority over all of your other workload, if that helps.
Yeah, I think thank you.
Uh-huh.
So this block will tell you what kind, if it's a RFQ, invitation for bid or request for proposal. And then in block 15, it'll tell you where you need to deliver your product or service. Or it might, in some cases in the RFP, there's a separate delivery schedule. And then in block 19 through 22, that each contract line item established and numbered will be listed here. Or they might also just refer you to the schedule. In some cases, this will just see attached schedule. So you just have to read through all this stuff before you start writing your proposal. So there can be FAR items that are incorporated by reference. And I mean, and they're extensive. They go from what kind of ship you can use to ship items. You can't, there's one I see all the time that I think is you're buying services, the government's buying services, and they put in a clause that says you can't use like blood diamonds, I guess, while it might not apply to your particular service or product, they're just blanket incorporated by reference, I think. That's my view as a guy on the other end of the requirement as opposed to the issuing office. This one's pretty simple. If you're required to sign the document, you sign and return everything to the issuing office. And they'll tell you the number of copies. We used to have to put together multiple binders and submit them. Now so much easier now that you can submit electronic documents. But once again, you read the RFP and in section L, the instructions to offerors, it'll tell you who to email it to, if you have to split it up into different volumes and separate files. So the instructions are normally pretty clear. This is kind of just for reference, really, is that in position 9 of the solicitation number, there'll be one of these codes, and it just specifies what kind of contract it's going to be. You have anything on this, Francine? These are.
No, usually it's going to be a solicitation number, and a lot of the times it'll be a C number, an R number, a P for a purchase request. Yeah, you just have to check and see what kind of instrument the contracting officer or buyer is using, because there are different types for each individual situation.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time I've seen C and D, and
Uh-huh. And yeah, there's a lot of C contracts, D contracts, indefinite delivery orders. That's generally the most used type is a P, a C, a D, or if it's solicitation, it's going to be a Q or an R is usually what you'll see the most.
so yeah, okay. So this is standard form 33. It's used in solicitations for proposals and award and negotiated contracts. A lot of it's divided into 4 major parts. Blocks 1 through 8 are basic information, including the solicitation number. There's a table of contents. This one, if you look, gets a lot more detailed, and it tells you the different sections. About halfway down the page, there's a list of all the different sections that are included in the solicitation. And then there's the offer area where you fill that in and sign it before returning it to the buying office. So like blocks 9 through 11, that's the area. Block 11 is the table of contents, and the sections of block 11 make up the whole solicitation. So it'll tell you all the different sections that are going to be in the requirement in the RFP. This again is a little in the weeds, but you can use this presentation for reference. If you have a question about what they're asking for in a particular block, you can come back to this presentation and look at this. One of the things is like block 5 here, issue date and starts the clock. So if they issue you an award and your delivery schedule is 14 days after, or ARO, after receipt of offer, this is where the start date is shown. So it'll be however many days after award. Block 5 is where the clock starts. And then here's block 9 is number of additional copies, depending on whether or not you required to submit hard copies or electronic copies. And then in block 12, and normally what I would do is I would put it in my proposal. Within the introduction section, I would tell the government how long my bid is good for. If you don't fill this block in, it defaults to 60 days. Block 14 is interesting because you have to acknowledge that you've received all the amendments. So a lot of times I've had proposals where we finished our proposal and getting ready to submit it, and they come out with another amendment. I've had up to probably 8, 9, or 10 amendments, and you have to acknowledge all of them, receipt of all of them in block 14. And then block 16 is, here's a good one, is whoever signs the offer has to be listed in SAM as the authorized signer. And so in some cases, like with everything else, all the documentation that you provide the government needs to be in agreement, whether it's your information listed in SAM, information listed on your website. Everything needs to agree. So if somebody signs this as an authorized signer and they're not listed in SAM, you're non-responsive. Then here in block 19 through 28 on the SF33 is going to be the information about the award. And block 23, it's pretty important because if you don't submit your invoices to the correct place, you're more than likely not going to get paid. Right now, I think is a wide area workflow where all the most of the invoices get submitted, and that's how contractors get paid. So
Yes.
I think we normally offer a class on wide area workflow.
Yes. And it can be complicated. So if you have the chance to take the class, I would encourage everyone to do so.
And this is the one I'm really most familiar with, is a uniform contract format. There's in the schedule, there's all the different subsections are listed. The part A is the solicitation, part B is the list of services or supplies they're looking for. There's a specification. Depending on what you're providing, there'll be packaging and marking. Like we were just talking earlier with Joshua, there's inspection and acceptance. So it may be that, in my experience, a lot of times inspection and acceptance could be done at the factory by, no, I forgot their name. I'm sorry.
DCMA?
DCMA, yeah. They'll, in some big, like I worked with Litton Data Systems for a long time, and they had a DCMA office on site that was responsible for all the inspection and acceptance of what they were delivering. Let's see. So this just goes over what's contained in the different sections. I mean, you can read this. It's Section A is going to always contain one of the standard forms as a cover sheet, which is, and we went through a couple of the different standard forms and what the blocks that they contain and what goes in those blocks. Section B is the order form. It lists all the supplies, the data, or the services to be required. I used to, for most of the things I was responsible for, there would be data as a line item, but it would be not separately priced. So data on smaller buys would be included in the price of the item you were buying.
That's usually still the case. The Seadrills are the data items, and they're usually not separately priced, but they're on their own standalone plan.
Yes, yeah, and then there's, like you said, there's Seadrills that list how to submit your data. The only time I've seen data separately is if, like, we were buying something that required a whole new set of technical orders, and so then they would be priced separately. Important is the statement of work. It lists out the non-specification requirements for the contractor's efforts. Statement of work will have a scope, applicable documents that you have to adhere to when you're meeting, when you're providing these things, whether it's mill standards, mill handbooks, they'll specify the mill standard for the kind of paint you're supposed to use or hardening of the materials. I guess there was a big stink at one point several years ago where the hardness requirements were not being met for bolts, aircraft fasteners. So that became quite a big issue. There could be in Section C, instead of a statement of work, it could be a performance work statement where they describe the results, but not how to meet those results. Normally, I think for services contracts, or maybe even if you were buying software, they tell you what they want, but not how you go about getting to where they want you to be.
And I was going to say, generally, if you get a solicitation from Hill Air Force Base, it 90% of the time will be a PWS. So,
And Francine, is there a difference between a performance work statement and a statement of work, or is it semantics?
well, it's basically the PWS is they, like Chuck or Tom said, they tell you what they want, but not how to do it. So then that's the contractor's responsibility to go in and say, this is how we propose to meet your requirement. This is how we're going to do it. And then they show in each PWS line item how they're going to meet it. So that's basically the difference.
Yeah, so a statement of work is they'll cite specific, they could cite, like they said, a specific document you're to follow when you're providing whatever you're providing. Performance work statement is a little more open-ended, where they're looking at the deliverable and not how you make that deliverable.
Just how you're going to meet their requirements for that.
So for example, Chuck, say this video production thing. You told them what you wanted, but you didn't tell them how to get there. They're developing their approach and providing that approach to you to approve.
In that sense, it would be a PWS.
Yeah, to me, that would be a PWS.
Thank you.
The next one is it's kind of, I don't want to say it's lazy on the part of the government, but it's easier on the government to do a statement of objectives and tell you as a contractor what their objectives are, and then you have to provide as a contractor the detailed approach to meeting the government statement of objectives. And I've seen it on really big embedded software projects. So like for a command and control system, the government might say, this is what we want. We want you, or for a radar, you need to be able to see stuff 500 miles out, and you need to be able to track 9G turn. You need to be able you need to be able to see two aircraft that are within X number of feet of each other. So they'll list all the objectives. You'll need to be able to process this many returns on a radar at the same time, and then you have to go back as a contractor and go, here's how I'm going to meet that objective. Here's how I'm going to meet the next objective. So it gives a contractor, it really opens up when you're buying big stuff. It opens up, it puts the design onus on the contractor. That makes sense. Packaging and marking, there's MIL standards or ASTM standards for markings. In about 2005, they came out with the UID, or the machine readable information, where now there's like barcodes, or I don't know what they call those little square things that have all that data in them. They're all over now. You go to a grocery store and there's one of those codes you can scan into your phone. Inspection and acceptance. Origin or destination, it'll be specified in the contract. For example, like I said, working with Litton Data Systems, there were DCMA guys that had an office right there in the facility, and so they would do the inspections, sign off on them. Delivery, where, when, whether it's free on board origin or free on board destination, that makes it responsibility. And I would say for the most part, it's always free on board destination to make shipping the contractor's responsibility. Is that,
That's correct. That's the government's preferred method is FOB destination.
your screen, Francine, is just to the left of mine, so that's why I'm always looking.
Oh, all right. That's okay. I'm sorry, my lawn care guy's here, so I keep muting myself.
Okay. Section G, there's some supplemental information. Section G data is accounting and appropriation data. It may also include who the contracting officer's technical representative is, and then it'll include directions on instructions regarding payments and billing and invoicing. Section H has got special contracting requirements. It's interesting. You always need to look for Section H, but there might not be, for the most part, there's not a lot in Section H, unless, for example, you're going to get government furnished property or facilities in some cases. So, contract clauses. Section I has contract clauses that by reference, you can go to this website. Hill Air Force Base used to have a FAR site, but it's gone. So this is the one you have to look at now. If you want to see the full texts, like a lot of people call them boilerplate clauses, but as it states here, the contracting officer has little or no leeway in preparing this section because each clause derives its authority from the FAR or from a public law or statute or executive order. So they go into a contract regardless of the applicability to that contract. And here's where they list the attachments. It could be specifications, drawings, the tech data, statement of work, statement of objectives. All these different things can go into Section J, even though, well, in Section C, the specifications can be too bulky to be, and so they're included in, they're put in Section J. Training systems, and then a list of addressees for procedural exhibits. Procedurals are contract data requirements list. And so if there's data required on a project, the data will be listed by a procedural number that you can go out and look at that procedural number, and it'll tell you how to submit your data, whether it's an engineering drawing, it's a test plan, what else have I've seen is all the different software documentation that's required when you're delivering software to the government. And then the other one that's in there is DD Form 254, which is a contract security classification specification. And it'll list on that form what the classification level of the requirement is.
I was going to say on procedurals, they're usually an attachment to the solicitation, and you do need to read them if you're awarded the contract or even in the solicitation phase, because it will give you addresses of where to send your data, which could be a different place than your items being shipped. So it usually gives you a point of contact and the shipping instructions for your procedurals.
Yeah, and it can be, it'll say, for example, it'll say, it'll tell you the format too. It'll be hard copy, it'll be on CD.
Yes.
It'll tell you one CD to Bob and one CD to another office and one CD to a test organization. So it could be quite extensive how they want the documentation delivered.
Yeah, so it is important as a contractor to make sure you review that and understand that attachment. Yeah,
I've got a list somewhere of all the different software products that I would have to deliver when I was working for a contractor. Actually, when I was working in the program office and managed a software project, our contractors were required to provide, there's probably 7 or 8 different software documents that we would ask for. And then Section K, rep search and other statements. In some cases, section K, it will tell you in the proposal request for proposal that you don't have to submit them separately as long as they're up to date in SAM. In a lot of cases, though, they want your reps inserts as part of the RFP. So you need to go to SAM and print them all out and submit them. Is that how you would do it, Francene?
Yeah, and also I was just going to add to that, if you are a contractor, it's important to keep that updated because a lot of buyers and contracting officers will review your statement, your certifications in SAM for future requirements or for doing market research. You know, we're looking for an AA or a small women-owned business. We'll sometimes go in and research that. So it's important at all times to keep that updated.
Right, and as you're talking about keeping information updated, there's this small business dynamic search, and you need to keep that updated too, because your contracting officers will use that to look for different companies. At least they told me that's what they use. Now here's probably two of the most important parts. Is section L, which is instructions to the offerors, and that'll tell you it can be as simple as it'll tell you the font size, it'll tell you the type of font that you have to use, it'll tell you the margins on the pages, and then it'll tell you if there's different volumes. It'll tell you your page limitations. It tells you exactly how the government wants to see your offer. And if you don't follow it, you could be considered non-compliant. I mean, I've had calls before where it's like, I want to do this. I want to submit it this way. Well, that's not what they ask for. So one of the things you have to realize is the government's asking for your proposal be formatted a certain way. And if you get 100 proposals to evaluate, I'm going to say that if I had 100 proposals to evaluate, I would look for non-compliance right off the bat. And if your proposal's not structured the way it's specified in section L, you go in that non-compliant pile. It's a workload thing, I think. So
yeah, it's very, very important that you follow the instructions. Just like Tom said, when you are overwhelmed with proposals, the first thing you do want to look for is who is non-responsive. And if you don't follow the instructions down to a T, you can be found non-responsive.
And then section M is the evaluation factor. So it'll tell you, 25% of your score is going to be for it'll list the sections of your proposal and the percentage that they apply to the score. So it could be price could be more important than, or price is, I can't remember the exact terminology, but
it'll give you the technical factors on how they're going to evaluate. How are they going to evaluate your proposal? So what factors are they looking for? What importance is placed on that? And sometimes it is price, sometimes it's other technical factors, but it's going to tell you what the evaluation factors are and how you're going to be evaluated. So this is also an extremely important part of your solicitation that you need to review, and you need to make sure that your proposal is matching the requirements for those evaluation factors.
So thank you, because what I was trying to come up with is that sometimes they say
price is equal to or less than.
Yeah.
Yes.
Price is equal to or less than the combination of technical and past performance.
Yes. And it will make a statement like that.
Yeah. So this is where your past performance is going to get evaluated. Section L is going to tell you how to submit your past performance. There may be a separate volume for past performance. In some cases, they'll ask for no more than 5 and no less than 3. And your past performance has to be on a contract that was completed within a certain time frame, whether 3 years or 5 years.
And it
So
will tell you the relevancy. It has to be a relevant past contract also.
recent and relevant,
Yes.
I think, is what I always see.
Yes.
So one of the things, you know, when you're responding to a government proposal is, how do I take my past performance and make it relevant? And so sometimes your past performance that you want to use may not be exactly on point, but if you are able to tie it to a particular facet of the requirement, whether it's size, scope, kind of engineering effort it is, these are all part of the art of responding to a proposal. So when I start outlining a compliance matrix for responding to a proposal, I'll start with section L. Then I'll go through and I'll look at section M, and I'll link it to the section L instruction, and then I'll go to section C, which is the work statement, the performance work statement, and I'll start looking for paragraphs within the performance work statement that modify or expand on the evaluation factors. So it may be that one evaluation factor may be X, but when you go back to the statement of work, that X is expanded on, and there might be 5 or 6 things that you need to address that are subsets of what's in the instructions in the evaluation factors. If that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, that's like, again, your PWS, your section L and M should mirror each other. You know, you're looking for specifics in the PWS, the specifics in the section L, how are you going to submit, and then how are they going to evaluate against your submittal. So those are really important things to review and make sure you understand before you even start writing your proposal.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things before you start writing a proposal is that you parse it out, and I like to use Excel spreadsheets to parse out the requirements, because then I can track them. And if you've got a big proposal and you've got different people writing different sections, you can assign, you can track who's been assigned to write that part of the proposal within the Excel spreadsheet. You can also include columns for review time. This is a little bit outside scope of this, but when you're writing a proposal, there's different reviews, red team reviews, there's gold team reviews, there's green team for the pricing review. You need to lay all those out on a timeline so you can track that you're on schedule to deliver your proposal when it's due. So there's tools to do this. There's software products that can do it, project management products, but one of the simplest ways to do it is with an Excel spreadsheet. Moving on, section K. This is your reps and certs. It could be as simple as certifying that your reps and certs are current in SAM, or they can ask you to, and this is a section I think where there's a lot of representations that require you to either say yes or no, or if you're a woman-owned small business, yes or no. If you're a hub zone business, yes or no. This is just goes into a little more depth about section L. Thankfully, I've never had to do an oral presentation on a proposal, but sometimes the service providers ask for oral presentations, or sometimes I've seen ones that require oral presentations where they're asking for a pretty complicated study. So there's that. Like we said, section L, the proposal format, the arrangement of the proposal, number of copies to be submitted, all those things. It's always interesting to me that the government doesn't want too small a font, they don't want too big a font. They're using a font size, not to exceed, can't be smaller than, well, I think 11 is the standard I've seen, 11 or 12. But that also has to do with the page limitations for each section of the proposal. So, if the page limitation was 5 pages, and the government doesn't want to get a proposal that's got a font size of 5, so they can add, more information in the 5 pages. I think one of the things when you're responding to a proposal, and they say that you're limited to 10 pages and you only have 8, my approach is that that's fine. I don't want to make up 2 more pages of information or just filler to meet that 10-page limitation. I don't think you need to go all the way up to the limitation.
No, you don't. And the government doesn't want 2 pages of fluff. They want your, this is how I'm going to do it, your technical capabilities, how you're going to do it. They don't want fluff in your proposal ever. So if you can only make 8 pages, that's fine. Do 8 pages. Don't add to it just to get to the 10.
And there's a whole art to call out boxes and diagrams that we can't go into here, but suffice to say that if it doesn't add to your proposal or it doesn't make it easier to read your proposal, having a call out box, it just regurgitates what's in the text, doesn't add anything. Okay, section M. This is where it tells you that what factors will be evaluated and how the evaluation of those factors or the weights assigned to them will be done. Past performance. Experience is different than past performance. Past performance is, in a lot of cases, I would try to weave experience into my narrative. Past performance is very specific and has to do with an actual contract, the length of the contract, and the dollar value of the contract. Experience can be a little broader than past performance. You could get evaluated on the resumes that you submit if they're required, your professional staff, who your program lead is. You can get evaluated on your technical understanding and your quality control processes. Sometimes the government can look at you may be the lowest price, but they look at they can look at a price that's outside the independent, well, I guess the independent government cost estimate. They can look at a price that's too low. It may be that they would award it to the low bidder, but yours is so low that they can determine that your technical understanding is lacking, because if you understood the requirement correctly, your price couldn't be as low as it is. Anyway, so this is how I approach writing the proposal. Parse all this out, but this is the evaluation. This is how the government will start evaluating the requirement. So here's some takeaways. Read everything, make sure you understand everything. If the government offers you the opportunity to ask questions, ask those questions. This is one of those that you have to balance, because sometimes the questions that you ask may give your competitor an indication of what you're thinking. It may be that by not asking a question, it may give you an advantage. It's all about Yeah, it's all about the development, the process. The evaluation criteria, know the evaluation criteria and what's important, what's most important. Make sure you're tracking the deadlines. You can't be late or you're non-responsive. So, you may put in 10 weeks of effort and miss the closing date.
Can I jump in on that too? Also, when you do submit your proposal, call the contracting officer, or email them and get a notification that they did receive your proposal. Because a lot of
Right.
times you think you've got it in there and they don't have it in their hands, email problems, whatever. I would just say, give them a call, shoot an email, and make sure that they have your proposal.
And some organizations use a separate address for submitting proposals, like a different mailbox in the contracting officer's address. So you may want to submit, to that mailbox, and you may also want to copy to the contracting officer, or at least send them an email and say, I submitted it. And can you validate that I submitted it? Bid all elements of the solicitation. Don't leave stuff out just because, well, I've been in situations where somebody wants to provide only part of the requirement. So instead of finding somebody to team with and submitting a bid that's complete, they're trying to shape the requirement too late. The time to shape the requirement is in the pre-solicitation or sources sought or RFI phase, not when you're responding to the requirement. And then again, tell the government how you're going to make their life easier, how you're going to fulfill their needs. And then we offer some classes on pricing, and we offer some through Govology. What's a wrap rate? How do you make up your wrap rate? How do you make your wrap rate competitive for the industry you're in? All those things are outside the scope of this presentation, but we do offer classes on that. This is simple. The SF30 can be used for an amendment or modification. I've seen anywhere, well, like I said, anywhere from 8 to 10 modifications or amendments to a solicitation. As the government figures out that they've either left something out of the statement of work, or they're getting comments back from that something's unclear or inconsistent, they'll issue a modification. This just is how the SF30 blocks are used to identify what solicitation the modification is applicable to. Block 13 it's going to tell you if you're required to sign the modification. So in most cases, the modifications get acknowledged on the first page of the proposal, the SF 1449 or whatever it is, and then each modification is stacked after that cover page and has to be signed separately also. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's just what's going to be on the amendment, and in a lot of cases, you'll get an amendment with some really administrivia kind of thing to it. Whether it's, but in some cases, it's important because it'll revise the solicitation due date. You may be they may extend it for whatever reason, and you just need to be aware that it's kind of a balancing act. If you submit your proposal too soon, there could be amendments that come out, and then you have to pull back your proposal and resubmit it to meet that amended requirement. So I don't know. I wouldn't submit my proposal I've done it 2 to 3 days in advance of the due date, but I wouldn't go any further in advance of the due date than that, because the potential for having to recall your proposal and resubmit it to meet an amendment that was issued at the last minute. Does the government, Francene, does the government have any like criteria for how close to a due date they'd issue an amendment?
I've seen amendments issued on the closing date.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you need to continually watch that solicitation, because you might get up to the actual closing date and they find there's a problem with the solicitation. They can amend on that date. So there's not a criteria. It's just keep watching it for any amendments that come out.
And in some case, you can follow a requirement on SAM, but we would go in and check. If we were working a proposal, actively working a proposal, every morning we would go in and check for amendments or modifications. We wouldn't wait for a notification, because sometimes there was a lag in the notification process. But yeah, there's somebody always was responsible for checking SAM for amendments. So anyway, conclusion. If you're new to government contracting and proposal writing, think about this. Look for contract opportunities that make sense. Justify spending the time and resources it takes to prepare contract proposals. In smaller companies, you usually don't have a defined budget for business development or responding to proposals. So you have to kind of look at each one you want to respond to and determine if the amount of time it's going to take to respond to that proposal and what your win rate, what you determine your probability of winning that is, and make some, business decisions about whether spending $5,000 to write a proposal or $10,000 to write a proposal, given what your probability of winning that proposal is. So that's another part of the art of business development, pursuing opportunities. How much are you willing? What kind of budget do you have over an entire year to respond to proposals, to bid on things? Because in smaller companies, the thing is, let's bid on everything. Well, I'm not sure that that's the most effective strategy. And then when you're writing a proposal, you really have to demonstrate a thorough understanding of the requirement, and then you have to really have a compelling narrative. So when I worked in the program office, I wasn't looking to develop anybody's capabilities to support me. I was looking for companies that offered a solution to a problem I had. So I was looking for people that would make my life easier. Your proposal preparation techniques will improve with time. There's a lot of information out there on how to write proposals. I don't want this to be this isn't an advertisement, but the company I dealt with, and I became a certified proposal writer through I took all these classes from a company called Shipley, and then the Association of Proposal Management Professionals has a certification process. They offer a lot of classes. So, you can hit and miss on writing proposals, or you can go out and get the handbooks and the formal education that's out there on how to propose on government contract requirements. One of the things that some organizations, if you don't win a proposal, they'll give you a debriefing. And in some cases, if you ask for a debriefing, they're required to give you a debriefing in a certain format. In other cases, depending on I think if it's through a multiple award schedule, or a multiple award IDIQ contract, it could limit the kind of debriefing or outbriefing you get. But for me, an example would be if I decided that I wanted to support the Air Force Program Office for F-15s, and I had the technical expertise to do that, and I submitted a proposal for some facet of their requirements, and they came back and I didn't win it because on price. I was technically acceptable, but I didn't win it on price. Or I wasn't technically acceptable, and I had a score that was close. My approach would be to go back to that program office, get my debriefing, and ask them to help me become more competitive, or not so much more competitive, but how can I better support you? What do I need to do in the future to to offer you or improve the offering that I have for you? If you take the time to identify a government agency as somebody that has a requirement for your product, and you don't win the first time you try to contract with them, do you just quit, or do you figure out a way to become more competitive, provide a better level of service, and strengthen your offering? I think that just because you lose one time on a requirement, that you shouldn't throw that customer away. You should continue to develop a relationship with them. Because supporting a government program office becomes a long-term proposition. And it may be that, well, there's a whole science to greening your team. So if after 5 years, all your guys that are on a team supporting a program office have gotten 5 years worth of raises, when it comes up for recompete, you have to evaluate how you're going to price that recompete bid, because your guys are all overpriced at this point. Somebody coming in new is going to have a lower price. So these are all things you have to work out, and it takes time to understand how this process works. So, you may not win your first proposal, but use that to figure out what you did wrong or how you can improve your what you're offering the government.
I was going to jump in real quick too and say, if on these larger RFPs, and it's pricing that you're interested in, you can see the awarded information on Beta SAM. Still, there's a requirement that they post that information, the total dollar amount and who the contractor was. They don't get into the line item pricing or anything, but you can find an overall price and who the contractor was. And that could help for the future also.
Yeah, and if you're doing services, you can go back in and look at the RFP and see how many people they ask or what service they ask, and kind of you might even be able to come up with a hourly rate for your guys. So anyway, we can help you. PTAC regional managers can help you. We can help you determine if you're, if you've parsed out section L&M correctly. If we can help you with, how to outline your response. Once you write your response, we can review it. It's at no cost. We're not a fee-for-service agency. So I think the next page here is a listing by region of who the PTAC managers are. And is this up to date? Is Mark Alexander he's still there, right?
He is until July 1.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, hi, Tom.
Hey, Mark. And then if you have any questions on this presentation, we can take your questions now.
Folks, this is the Q&A period now, so go ahead and submit your questions either in the chat box or orally if you'd like. Tom, while they're maybe typing in their question, a question for you and Francene, and it has to do with cost. As former contracting officers, what is the, companies need to make a profit when they bid on and are awarded a contract. But what is that pricing margin? What is that win margin? Is it in the ballpark of 7%, 10%? When, as a contracting officer, when does a red flag go up to you when you see that the profit margin is too high? How would you respond to that?
If the profit margin is too low, that's a red flag. You might not be in the competitive range. I would say and this is just general ballpark because it really depends on the acquisition. Anything too high, over maybe 10%, that's a red flag too. You want to be in the competitive range with your competitors. Too low, you're going to be thrown out. Too high, you're going to be thrown out. So it's hard to say a percentage, but like I say, anything too high or too low, you're out.
A lot of it depends on how they want you to present your pricing. The government may just ask for a total price, or the government may ask you to break down your price by in your proposal by the salary you're paying, the overhead costs, your G&A, and then your profit. And so it used to be that we'd have a wrap rate. We could propose a wrap rate of, like, in some cases 1.8 to almost 2. And now in the services industry, when I was working on the medical contracts in the private sector, a competitive wrap rate could be down below 1.3. I mean, but within that wrap rate, your profit margin, we would plug in numbers from a profit of 3% to 6% to see how that affected our wrap rate. And that we've got a webinar that's presented by Judy Brandt, and she has I think as part of her seminar, she offers a copy of an Excel tool that she has where she can plug in different wrap rates. A smaller company has a lower wrap rate because their G&A rates are usually lower. A big company like Linton Data Systems has got a huge amount of G&A on a project. So it's an art, Chuck. I don't do pricing, and there's a reason I don't do pricing.
Yeah, and some of these bigger acquisitions, you're automatically going to have a pricing case, where they're going to break down each cost, and that's where we'll negotiate from. But it's in a competitive one, and it is, if they're just asking for a flat price, if you're too high, you're going to get thrown out. If you're too low, you're going to get thrown out.
Yeah. So it depends on what kind of requirement it is. If it's a negotiated requirement, they may come back to you and negotiate price. It may, and then so I've done it both ways where it's just been a line item cost, and then they want some very detailed information on a spreadsheet with all the different categories that you're using, G&A, overhead. They may even ask for all the things that make up your overhead rate, or G&A rate too.
Thank you, Tom and Francene. Other questions? Joshua, is there anything in the chat box? I didn't see anything.
Nope, we don't have any others. Paula did mention with the solicitations to make sure to sign and date your solicitations or you will be disqualified. That's something apparently that gets missed.
The other thing has become a big question now, and I don't know, has to do with meeting the requirements for cybersecurity and whether, you know, that the cybersecurity requirements that the government has are going to become part of your G&A costs. So they're not going to be a direct cost to a contract. They're going to be considered G&A, and they're going to make up part of your wrap rate. So it's a constant question: is am I going to get directly? Can I directly charge a contract for the cost of getting a CMMC certification? And the answer, as far as I know, is no. You can. It becomes part of your overhead or G&A costs. So.
Francene, I see we have a question from Melissa. Her question is, how do we fill out the NIST part of the solicitation?
The NIST part?
Somebody needs to clarify that. What, I don't understand the question. Let's put it that way.
I'm sorry, I don't either.
Melissa, can you ask that orally?
Melissa's still on mute. There we go.
Go ahead, Melissa, if you can. She's saying that she doesn't speak. I think her speakers are working.
Oh.
Melissa, why don't you go ahead and maybe clarify your question in the chat? NIST, Tom, why she's maybe typing that in, do you think she's referring to the CMMC requirement, the NIST 800-171?
So NIST 800-171 is going to be DFARS 7012. That's where that requirement comes from. So if DFARS 7012 is in your, it is a clause that's in the RFP, in your reps and certs, you're saying you meet that requirement. I mean, if it's a requirement, if DFARS 7012 is in the RFP, you have to go through and do those things that are required by the NIST 800-171 or the DFARS 7012, and you just go and read 7012, and it tells you what you have to do. You have to do your assessment using the 800-171 assessment guide, come up with a score, put it in the supplier performance risk system. Yeah, there's a couple other things. If Melissa wants to call me.
She's responded, Tom and Francene. She says, quote, the solicitations that are coming out have a NIST section in the back of them now. I guess I'm just wondering if we need to fill any of that out.
If it's in the request for proposal, yes. But I mean, if she could send me an example, my email's on the last chart, I'd be interested to see what they're asking for now.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know what they're asking for.
Well, Melissa, feel free to reach out to Tom or Francene. Well, she's okay. There she is. Tom, she's going to call you.
Okay, that's good.
Offline here. Okay, you're very welcome, Melissa. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. You must have answered them, folks. Pretty good job. Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll kind of wrap up here. First of all, you know, this was a in the trenches type of training. We went into a lot of detail as we need to. As you can see, responding to an RFP solicitation requires some thought, some research, and some thoroughness. And I thought Tom and Francene did an excellent job in kind of outlining what a solicitation involves. And as you can see, it's kind of an artwork. It's art form. It's at times can be rocket science, but you get better at it the more you do it, and you can't win if you don't bid. So as Tom mentioned earlier, you get better at it, and you get more informed through debriefings and just the sheer repetition. So Tom also had a slide that said that while these can be involved and a little bit overwhelming, PTAC is here. We've got your back. We're going to help you with every step of it. So at no cost to you. So take advantage. Reach out to your regional manager. Every one of us is trained to do this. It just doesn't. You just don't have to be a contracting officer to be able to respond. All our PTAC staff are trained, whether through experience or on the job training or through formal training. So we can help you with these. So we encourage you to do that. So with that, Francene and Tom, thank you for the presentation today. Let me add a couple of things that are coming up before we conclude. Our next PTAC outreach will be July 14th. And we are going to have a representative. I'm not sure. They just hired a new one here a week or 2 weeks ago, I found out. And that person most likely will be doing the presentation. But it's with the Inland Port Authority. We've all heard of them. We've all read about it. They're not controversial, but there has been some pushback from, I think, citizens that have to do with air quality or traffic. But the Inland Port Authority is going to be our next presenter, and they're going to talk to us about what they're doing out there west of the airport, what their mission is, and what opportunities there may be. So put that on your calendar, July 14th, and you'll see a flyer from PTAC with some details about that coming out in the next week to 10 days. Also, we are pleased to announce that PTAC will have our annual symposium, and that will be on October 21st. And we will have that in person, certainly by October. We feel that we have reached a point in terms of the coronavirus that it's safe to do so. And that's probably the case now, but certainly by October, we feel that that should be able to happen. So put that on your calendar. We'll put out a, what do we call it? Save the date. We'll have a save the date flyer for you. And that will be at the Davis Conference Center this year, but more details to follow. Oh, I think we have one question I see for you, Tom and Francene. Let me pull that up. The question is, Tom, are you saying RAP rate or RAC rate? Please explain.
WRAP is a wrap. It's how you wrap your salary cost. So wrap rate, for every dollar I pay to an employee, there's costs associated with that dollar, whether it's fringe costs like unemployment or SSI or vacation time. There's overhead costs associated with that are really associated with paying that employee or supporting a particular requirement. And then there's your G&A. There's your facilities manager, your security manager. There's all the costs associated with that, with being in business that are added to the dollar you pay your employee. So that's your wrap rate. If I add everything up, it comes up to a percentage. So for every dollar that I pay an employee, I have to charge the government $1.23 or $1.38 or $1.60. That's your wrap rate.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, John. Lastly, unless there's not any other questions, Tom also mentioned that in addition to the PTAC outreach and webinars and trainings, we also have monthly webinars that are offered through a contractor of ours, that's Govology. And go to our PTAC website under events, and you'll see the Govology monthly webinars that are offered. Because you are a PTAC client, they are offered to you free. However, you need to contact your regional manager to get the code. So we have secret codes that we use in PTAC. Not really, they're just codes that you have to put in your registration to get in. Otherwise, you do have to pay for them. So contact your regional manager and we'll get the code, and then you're free to watch those. They're offered sometimes at least once a week, sometimes more. And the subjects are has everything to do with procurement. Tom mentioned some will deal with pricing, wide area workflow, marketing, writing a proposal. So take advantage of those if you would like. So unless there are anything else, we will go ahead and conclude, and thank you for participating with us today. Again, Tom and Francene, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you,
All
Chuck.
right, thanks, everybody.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.